In this video, we are going to help you create your first bass line in Ableton Live 11 Lite. Welcome to the default view of Ableton Live 11 Lite. This is called the session view. First thing we're going to do is remove some of these extra tracks. So if we left click to highlight the track and then right click and select delete and repeat the process. Now in order to create our bass line, we need a bass sound. We come up to the top left hand corner, click on sounds and then bass. There are lots of bass sounds to choose from, but for your first bass line, I would recommend using the basic electric drive bass. Here's how that sounds. Just a basic electric bass sound. In order to use this sound, we'll left click and drag up to the top clip, let go, and you can see that this sound is loaded onto track 1. We're not going to edit the sound at all here, but if you would like, you can play with the different dials to create the sound that you desire for your project. Next, we need to create a MIDI clip in order to enter the notes for our bass line. So you come up and double click on the top clip, and this is the MIDI editor shown below. We're going to create an 8-bar bass line in this example. So under length, left click and drag up until you get 8. And as you can see, this is 8 bars. If we click on this headphone icon, we can click on the piano roll and this will play the notes using the sound we've loaded. That's a bit high for a bass. So if you scroll down, you can see it says C4, C3. These are the octaves currently being played. We'll play our bass line around C1. In order to enter notes, you just double click. You can left click, drag and highlight. Then if you want, you can right click to duplicate notes, drag them around, drag them up and down. And you can delete them as well. In our examples today, we're going to use the scale of C major. So if you click on scale, C major is the default scale. You can see that's highlighted the notes on the piano roll, and the C major scale uses all the white notes, as you can see here. If you'd like, you can click on scale here, and it will only show you the notes in the scale. But we'll keep the entire piano roll for the rest of this video. Let's begin with tip number 1. Follow the chords. When creating a bass line, you can just use the notes in the scale, as highlighted here. But in order for the bass line to sound coherent within your song, it's worth following the chords. The easiest way to do this is to follow what's known as the root note of the chords. If you're not sure about root notes or chords or chord progressions, then there will be videos in the description to help you. What we'll do is create a very basic 4-bar loop chord progression in the key of C major using the 1, 4, 5 and 6 chords, and then we can create a bass line around this. So to do this, we'll create a new track. You right click, insert MIDI track. We're going to use a electric piano sound. Come down to piano and keys. And here's electric piano basic. Left click and drag as we did before. Here's the instrument. We're going to keep this exactly the same as the default. Double click. You can see C major is already highlighted. And we're going to create a 4-bar loop. So our progression will go 1, 4, 1, 4, 5, 6. The 1 chord is C major, and that has the notes C, E and G. So here's C, E and G. And that will last for half a bar. So you highlight and this little handle will take us to half a bar. Then we go to F major, which has the notes F, A and C. And then we repeat this, so I can Left click and highlight all these notes, right click and duplicate. Then we go to the 5 chord for a bar, and the 5 chord is G major, which has the notes G, B and D. There's G, B and D for an entire bar. And then finally we go to the 6 chord, which is A minor, which has the notes A, C and E. A, C and E. There we are. So let's listen to this. We'll click on play. Okay, so now let's create a bass line to go with this. The most basic bass line, as I said, will use the root note. Our chords went C, F, C, F, G, A minor. So we'll just use the root notes, which will be C, F, C, F, G, A. And when the chords change, our bass note will change. So let's come over to our bass track. First note is C for half a bar. Then F. Then we repeat that. Then we go to G for a bar. And to A for a bar. And for the moment, we'll just repeat all of this again because our bass line is 8 bars long, but our chord progression is only 4. Okay, so if we click here, we'll solo the bass just to listen to that first. And then we'll come off the solo. So that's the most basic bass line you could possibly create. Just follow the chords. Tip number 2, follow the drums. So now we have a basic bass line using the root notes and using the same note length as the chords, but it's quite boring. So in order to create a bit of rhythm, the easiest starting point is to follow the drum beat. The bass and the drums have a close relationship when you're building a groove. In a band situation, a bass player and a drummer will often have a close relationship in order to build the foundation of a song. First, we need a very basic drum loop to go in our song. So we'll create another track, insert MIDI track, click on drums, and we'll use the 707 core kit. Left click and drag up. Here's the core kit. If you're not sure about drums, we have another video about creating your first drum beat in Ableton, but this will be a very simple example here. Double click on the top clip to create a MIDI track. We'll do a 4-bar loop for the drums. Here are the sounds of the drum kit. Okay, so we'll start with the bass drum. We can preview it by clicking play. I'll solo it as well for now. Add a snare. We'll alternate between these 2 snare types. And then end with a bit of a change. And we'll just add a small variation in the bass drum. Okay, that'll do for this example. So the easiest thing to do is for the bass to replicate the bass drum. So every time the bass drum plays, we will play a note in our bass line. So let's go back to our bass. Let's play the whole track together. So you can hear for the first 2 bars, the bass plays with the bass drum. Except for this final F where we've changed the bass drum rhythm. So let's change this to begin with. So that's that final F, this final F with the bass drum. Now let's change the G. And finally the A. Okay, and then we'll just duplicate this for the whole 8 bars. So I'll remove these and duplicate these notes. And that's our root notes following our bass drum. You can also run counter to the drum beat if you want to create interest or weave the bass line around the drums. The easiest way to enforce the rhythm is for the bass and the drums to be in step with one another. Tip number 3, fill in the gaps. If the bass line feels a bit bland or linear, we can improve it by using some more notes. We can use notes of different lengths to create interesting rhythms that may not coalesce with the drum beat. We can use notes from the underlying chords to generate bass lines. So if you remember when we were creating our chord progression, each chord had 3 notes, and so far we've only used the root note. So what I'll do is for our first 4 bars, I'll leave them as we created in the last section, and we'll add some alterations to the second half. So the first thing we can do is use the other 2 notes from the chords. We'll keep this C and F the same. So we'll start by moving up to a higher G and then come back down, I think. The other note we can use from C major is E, so let's play E here. I want to keep these 2 notes playing with our bass drum. We've gone to the F chord, so we can also use A and C from F. Let's move these down to C. Let's see how that sounds. Okay, so it gives it a different sound. we go to the G, we can use the B and D notes. If we go G, B, D, we use an arpeggio, which is the notes of the chord played in order. That can create an interesting bass line sometimes, so let's try that here. And then finally we go to A minor, which is the notes A, C and E. So rather than keeping to this rhythm, we'll create a mini bass line that leads us back to the initial C chord. Okay, let's preview this. Okay, so that's a basic bass line for you. Obviously you can vary it depending on what you want for your project, what style of music you use, but this is some thoughts for you to begin with. You can also interact with the velocity here. If you see I move it, left click, move this up and down. Changes the attack that each note has, so you can provide emphasis on different notes, maybe a root note or the first note in a bar, whatever you want, but experiment with that and it will create different feels, different grooves to the rhythm of your bass line. One final thing that can be useful is to provide a bit of EQ to create a bit of space for your bass line so it can be heard and doesn't overtake your other instruments. One way to do this, if you come up to Audio Effects, EQ, and you see here it says Channel EQ. If you left click and drag this onto your bass instrument, you can see it comes here, comes next in the chain from the electric drive bass. And what I tend to do is to reduce the high frequencies, and that just gives the other instruments above it a bit more space to breathe. You can experiment with this depending on what instruments you use. So here's how that sounds now. Watch this playlist for more Ableton videos.